Welcome to the Cambridge Tech Podcast, talking all things technology from the heart of the UK's tech capital. Here are your hosts, Faye Holland and James Parton.
Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Faye. So, James, you had a week off last week. How was that?
Yes, I've been gallivanting around the north of England. Well, I'm the south as well, actually. I've been everywhere. We went to Manchester, we went to York, and down to Brighton. So, yeah, looking forward to getting back into Cambridge. How about you? What have you been up to?
I had quite a Cambridge wireless week last week. We had the founders dinner on Wednesday evening. Really interesting session from Bernard Twomey from the University of York. So you wouldn't have seen him up there because he was in Cambridge, talking about the fragility of maritime resilience. Which, if you think about it, the maritime industry is so important. It's a real vital artery to global trade. So he was very thought-provoking in that. So I love those sessions when you hear from someone who just makes you think about something that you normally don't think about. Yeah, so that was great. I actually was really lucky. I sat with some great people at dinner who I hadn't met before, and I had an out-of-body experience.
Okay, why? Go on then.
You're going to love this one. So Susan Hewitt was talking to Jennifer Schooling at ARU about this podcast, and she was talking about it saying, oh yeah, they interview all of these things and it's a really great way of understanding the ecosystem. And she carried on talking, and then she looked at me and I kind of looked at her back, and then Chris Lawson leant over and went, oh, I'm a real fan of the podcast. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me they were talking about this one. It was very surreal. So, yeah, that was that. And then Thursday, still with Cambridge Wireless, it was an international conference. So I was, this will be no surprise to you, I was networking queen of the day. I actually ended up just finding a table, sitting down, and I literally just had a revolving group of people coming talking to me. It was really bizarre, but it was brilliant. But it meant that I actually only went, I felt that I had to go into the closing keynote. Otherwise I hadn't been in a single session.
You were holding court, were you?
It did kind of feel like that. Although Martin, who I've known for many years, came over, and I went to him, no, not now. And so he just went, okay, I'll come back in a minute, Faye. I'm like, bless him.
Yeah, now you're just going to keep adding to all of this work that you've got to do, right?
Oh, that has definitely happened, but that's a story not for the podcast. So let's move on with the news, shall we?
Let's do that.
Okay, so we'll start up with some amazing news for Gonçalo de Vasconcelos, whose company Renewal has been bought by the Welsh financial services company Go Compare for a reported £63 million. So absolutely fantastic for Gonçalo. Who said Cambridge doesn't do fintech? I think we've got quite a legacy of really successful exits in fintech. And of course, I will definitely be reaching out to Gonçalo to see as and when he would like to share his journey with everyone.
Yeah, once the dust settles, that would be a fascinating story to hear, wouldn't it? We got news of a new investment fund with an initial target of £2 million, seeking to democratise access to a greater range of Cambridge science and technology startups. ET Capital wants to make injecting funds into Cambridge's thriving startup ecosystem much more accessible to investors, particularly individuals. And we actually have Martin Rigby on the podcast later this month to tell us more about it.
Indeed. Founders at the University of Cambridge announced their latest Start Accelerator 2.0 cohort. All 8 are founded by current and former University of Cambridge students, researchers and professors. And there are names on this list, James, that we both recognise from 21 to Watch and the Trinity Bradfield Prize.
Yeah, that's fabulous, isn't it? We've spoken before about the serendipity between the two, all the competitions and programs that run in Cambridge. So it's nice to see that progression. The startups will be on a 3-month accelerator, culminating with a demo day pitch to investors. The 7 are Squish, who will be on the podcast in the next couple of weeks, Pine Peak, Tresmic, Cambridge Adaptive Testing Limited, Podromic, Electra Bio Limited, Gastro Body Therapeutics, and a quantum company currently in stealth mode, which sounds exciting.
It certainly does. So we'll be watching those over the next few months for sure. So let's get on to today's podcast with guest Russell Haggar, CEO and co-founder of VyperCore. Hi Russell, it's great to see you again, hot on the heels of your 21 to watch win. So I saw some coverage in Cambridge Independent, an extra piece for you. How's it been?
We've really enjoyed the coverage, actually. Well, we really enjoyed the event. The event was fantastic because you put on a lovely evening for us all. Really good people in the room, actually. Caught up with a bunch of people we haven't seen for a while. Met a whole bunch of new people. Really interesting group. And I think what's interesting about the group is the award winners, heavy bias towards biotech, which is kind of where Cambridge is now, but actually a good hardcore rump of hard tech plays in the room. We weren't the only chip player there, and it's good to see that still surviving. And we've had a lot of inbound interest off the back of that, so it's been really exciting.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So let's jump straight into your main interview now. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about how you got to VyperCore? So about you and your journey, but then also the formation of VyperCore.
So I've been 35 years in what I like to call hard tech industry. So I'm old enough to remember the 90s when we called this all high tech. And back then Silicon Fen was a lot of silicon, a lot of chip companies. And I've been around the hard tech arena, computer science and chips and software and compute and connectivity and lots of stuff. Had a lot of fun over the years. And about 10 years ago, I met Ed when he was still an undergrad at university through a very circuitous route. He was doing some work as an undergrad, which I came across and I thought it looked really, really interesting. I just kept in touch. And he came back to me in 2019 and that had morphed into his PhD project. His PhD research, which he was doing at Bristol University under a gentleman called David May, who's one of the sort of grandfathers of high-performance processor design in Europe, and well-known worldwide for what he's done. And Ed had done his research in that area and just deepened and broadened and deepened and broadened, and he'd come up with this really, really cool idea. Now, the problem in 2019 was there weren't any chip startups getting funded anywhere in Europe. So we stayed in touch. I gave him some help. And then fast forward a couple of years, just as lockdown's ending, I got in touch with Ed again. I could see a potential to go to market. He was freed up from a few things that has been holding him back. He'd finished his PhD research. And over the space of a year, it just sort of settled down. I started off advising him, just nudging him, encouraging him. And then I was at a loose end and it seemed a good fit. So we just came together as a team and then we went out fundraising.
It was just one of those typical serendipitous points in time that everything just seemed to align for you.
I think so, yes. As a wise man in Cambridge once explained to me the difference between serendipity and Brownian motion when it comes to networking. This feels much more on the serendipity side, actually. Just happened to connect and there was enough there to stay connected and to come back again later on when the idea had developed and the market was right and the funding environment had improved. And that's, absolutely.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Why don't we jump now then into VyperCore itself, the problem you're solving and the kind of technology. Do you want to start with a kind of a high-level overview and then we'll drill down a little bit?
The super high level would be to say that what we're doing for general purpose compute is what GPUs would be doing for AI compute. The thing is, there's dozens and dozens of people trying to solve performance bottlenecks in AI compute with different sorts of GPUs and different sorts of processor. On the other hand, no one's doing anything in terms of a step change, major changes in performance for general purpose compute because it's difficult. If it was possible, people would have been doing it by now. And one of the big difficulties comes from the need to be able to run all the code that's already out there. So one of the useful things about AI is it's a big enough market, it's an exciting enough market that people will rewrite their code, they'll create these models from scratch, they'll write them in a way that you can deploy on a GPU. You don't have to worry about running the code that's already been out there. So people that have tried to solve the problems in general purpose compute, what we call CPUs, the stuff that's inside your phone, your laptop, in a regular data center, if you want to make it go super, super fast, you can re-architect how the processor does its thing, but then you can't run any of the code that's already out there. And we're talking decades worth of code that you don't want to be able to keep running. So that's what's been holding the industry back. So the industry's been relying on just chips getting smaller, transistors getting faster, and That's been okay so far, but actually, if you're looking at what happens in the data center, the sort of powerful silicon that's inside a server, those chips haven't got any faster for at least 10 years or so. Just the laws of physics have intervened. You can still put more transistors down, but you can't make them go faster. So general purpose computers been really hit a bottleneck as to how you make things go more performant and how you sort of address some of the bottlenecks that have been emerging. And that's what our technology does. Our technology comes out and addresses the needs of high-level languages, like so code that's written in Python and Java and C# and that whole class of language. There are well-known bottlenecks inside the way that programs in those languages are being run, and those bottlenecks haven't been fixable in the past. And that's the insight that Ed's brings from essentially 10 years' worth of research, is a way to fix that bottleneck, remove it entirely, in a way that allows you to keep running your code without changing any of it. And the upshot of all of that is we deliver up to 5 times more performance. So for a similar amount of silicon on a like-for-like basis, our processor chip will give you 5 times more performance, which is, that could be, if you're a customer who doesn't want more performance, you just want it cheaper, well, there's a huge cost benefit there. If you're a data center operator rolling out new data centers and you've got a certain number of customers you want to service, you can now service it with far fewer servers, which means you're using less energy, using less real estate, so the whole cost of the data center model goes down. As a startup, that's the view, but the technology itself has the potential to permeate the entirety of the processor industry. So whole general purpose CPU market, everything from what's inside your washing machine to what's inside the data center, including your watch, your laptop, your phone along the way. That's a really grand vision. Whether we get there as a startup or whether we end up targeting servicing just one niche is another matter. So as a technology, we have the potential to change the entire CPU industry.
So one question I had when I was just reviewing the website, are you embedded or you're also like a cloud-based SaaS solution? Are you both? Is it one or the other?
We're building a chip.
Yeah.
The chip is designed to go into the data center. So the route to market we're taking is to copy all the routes to market that have already been done. So not asking the customer to do anything differently. So we're looking to sell an accelerator card, and that card has our silicon on it. Yeah. That card is something you would deploy into a server. Just as you would, if you were building a data center, you might put a GPU into your server on a card. Yeah. So it's exactly the same deployment model.
And it's compatible with all the data centers.
So it's then compatible with your existing. So in a server today, you've got a great big server class chip on the motherboard, a Xeon or an AMD device, and that's where you'll be running your general purpose code. We sell you a card, you put the card in the server, and it's just a few command line changes to simply redeploy that existing piece of software off the motherboard onto the card, where it then goes so much faster.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it sparked a few thoughts when I was doing the research ahead of the interview. One theme that came out with our conversation with Deloitte, actually, when we looked at their 2025 tech themes for the year, there was this whole FinOps piece around reducing cost of cloud and just how much wastage there is in typical cloud provision, and that kind of brute forcing. When you need to go faster, you just rent more space, right? So there seems like there's a number of benefits of your technology. You've touched there briefly, but maybe we can go back and look at the environmental benefit of less energy consumption. There's the cost benefit. How does that kind of business model of delivering the new chips outweigh the cost of just brute forcing by buying more compute?
So I'd be daft if I was to claim that 5 times more compute means 5 times less cost. There's always overheads, but fundamentally we're talking about a step change in cost, a step change downwards. So you're looking at the cost of buying the kit, so in financial terms, the CapEx. You look at the cost of running the kit, so running the data center, and a lot of the cost of the data center is the energy for the chips, but also the energy for the heating and removing the heat and all of that. So the operating cost, as it comes down if you're doing more compute for less real estate, and the capex comes down if you're buying less silicon to do the job. I think what's really interesting on the energy side, and you can look at it from an environmental or just simply a raw cost perspective, how you can look at it either way. Everyone was getting really excited over the last 12 months about the energy requirements to power this new generation of data centers for AI. And it's a fair point, because AI is starting from zero. So the actual growth rate from zero to the large amount that's going to happen is significant. But if you look at the numbers that underpin that, comparing the amount of AI data center rollout with the non-AI, so the general purpose data center rollout, 80% of the growth in energy consumption of new generation data centers is coming from the general purpose piece. So a fifth is coming from AI, 4/5 from general purpose. And the issue is there is no solution in the general purpose industry today which makes a step change in any of this. That's what sets us apart.
Yeah,
there's lots of innovations. People are trying to put ARM CPUs into the data center. They have a lower power requirement typically than x86. People are looking at RISC-V, but they're all either going after niches like data analytics or high performance compute, but there's nothing there for general purpose compute that makes a difference.
That's great. No, thanks.
So to help the clients to understand and get an experience of what you're doing, you've launched VyperLab so that they can start to understand the power of what you're doing and those 3 huge benefits. Is there anything that you can share about people that are using it, some of the test results and things that you've had back?
So people sign up to VyperLab under confidentiality. And one of the key reasons why we've launched it in the cloud is we don't even get to see their code. In early conversations with a lot of customers, we're asking them to take some of their live workloads, stuff they're using in production, and we want to get them to run that code unmodified on VyperLab. It's production code, it's got their secret source, it's their data as well. So by running it in the cloud, we give them what they need and they run it, and then they give us the results. So it's all done for that reason. It's all fairly confidential. So we're going to aggregate results over time and release those. But what we have done already is we've run our own workloads on it. So the language we're supporting today is Python. Over time, we'll roll out a whole bunch of other languages, but Python is the biggest language in the market we're going after. There's a whole bunch of benchmarks in Python world called Pi performance. And this is the gold standard. When people bring out different Python implementations, this is what they go to demonstrate how much faster or better one solution is versus another. So we run the whole of the Pi performance benchmarks suite on VyperLab, and it's given us really interesting numbers, really interesting for 2 reasons. First of all, 12 months ago, whilst we were still building VyperLab, we did a whole bunch of modelling, so deep dive technical modelling before we'd even built it, to try and say how much acceleration to expect, and that's where we got the 5x number from. So we're now comparing what we modelled 12 months ago with what we've just demonstrated, and we're on the money. We've delivered all the performance we said we were going to do. And then those numbers in absolute terms are 5x, that's up to 400% faster, which is, this is an industry which is typically delivering 3 or 4%. CPU industry is typically delivering 3 or 4% year on year. And this is the step change we're talking about. Up to 5x is a huge change. Even 2x would get a lot of chip companies really excited. And we're coming along with up to 5x. So it's demonstrated that.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's really interesting. So what do you feel the uptake has been like? Because it's been a while since you launched VyperLab after doing your own work. So what's the uptake been like? And is it just going to carry on? Or will there be a point where you stop that because you've got enough of that, the information and data from it?
So VyperLab's only been out of the wild for less than a month. So we're still in the process of signing up. We've had a lot of interest. The target partner we want isn't, people are not going to experience an immediate speed up. The way VyperLab works is we don't have silicon yet. We're still some way off having silicon. It takes a long time to design and build a processor chip. So VyperLab is essentially an emulation of what the silicon will do. So it runs slower in absolute terms than what they're getting today. So we're not looking for customers to actually run their live services off VyperLab. It's an experiment. They take the code they've already got, they deploy it onto VyperLab. In doing that alone, they're validating the key part, which is you don't change your code. So they're simply redeploying, not changing a line of code. So they tick that box. They then run their workload, and our platform is then counting the CPU cycles that they're using, and they're comparing it with what they would use with and without. And they then get that number comes back to us. That's all we see is the headline. And we analyse it and we say, fine, whatever that application was, when we have silicon, we'll be delivering you, it could be 3x, 3.1x, 4.2x, whatever the numbers turn out to be. So that's the sort of engagement we're talking about. In terms of going forward, we've got a bunch of feature drops we're creating over the course of this year. So we're enriching the experience of what sort of insights we can give them And we want to bring customers on board who are looking at this as a long-term partnership. It's going to take us a couple of years to get to silicon. We're looking for players who are doing technology scouting, who have an interest in seeing what's coming over the horizon. And if they play with us now, then not only can they just see how good it is, but actually there'll be things about their code which we can support better, so we can factor that into our development roadmap. So we're looking for partnerships rather than one-off engagements.
So just to test my understanding then, it sounds like because the user experience for the actual software developer is actually, there isn't one really, they just continue doing what they do. Does that mean that you're not then trying to market your services to developers, you're more marketing to data center providers?
The variety of ways. So the simple way of describing the overall set of customers is people that use servers in a data center. Now, some of those are, you mentioned FinOps earlier. So if you go to the investment banking community, there's a lot of people there who are running private on-premise data farms. And they'll be running their own applications in their own hardware, and they'll be running a mix of code. Some of that code will have been fine-tuned and optimized, and we can't touch it. But we've identified a whole bunch of opportunities in the whole wide investment banking fintech market where we can offer a lot of value. And then in the data center, you've got there's people operate data centers for their own in-house applications, and you've got the merchant data centers, the hyperscalers who are offering hardware platforms to web enterprises and so on. So essentially in that market, we're talking about people that are writing apps, and they want to do more of it. So you're a web enterprise, you've written it in Django and Python, and you're scaling. And at the moment, you're just buying more servers at peak time and turning them off at other times. That's a very flexible way of doing it, but it's costly. So if we're in a position where they can fire up fewer servers at peak time, we're saving them directly a lot of money, but they don't have to change the code. So we're not aiming it, as you say, at software developers. We're aiming at people that use servers.
No, that makes sense. You just mentioned there you're some way away from actual silicon. Are you going to go like a fabless route and outsource manufacturing? Is that the plan?
Yes. So there's three models essentially we can work with. We have a technology which has to go into a processor, and we have to build the processor ourselves to make it work. So we have a rich vein of patents. We've already got our first 4 patents filed. We've got a whole bunch more to come out this year. So in terms of intellectual property, the raw intellectual property is very strong and a growing platform. So that's something we could use over time to work with other people who already have their processors and find a way of adapting their processors to do it our way. More directly inside the way that chip industry works, there's 2 models. You build a chip, and you don't, unless you're Intel, you don't build your own chip in your own factories. You outsource it to TSMC or somebody. So that's, as you say, that's the fabless model. Or there's an IP approach, which is ARM's model, Imagination, and other processor vendors, where they design the chip, but they don't build it, and they sell that design to somebody who is building a chip. I think the consensus generally is in general purpose compute. The IP model, there's been 1 or 2 really successful plays like ARM, but actually there's also been a vast number of people that haven't managed to go the distance. And fundamentally, the issue is the processor is the most valuable piece of technology you can put together in that sort of application, and you're relying on your customer to be ready when you've got it ready. So you can't control your route to market. So one of the reasons we've gone after the server market is it allows us to build and sell our own chips on cards, and we can control that timing to market. It's all in our control. We're not reliant on third parties to be ready when we need them to be ready, which is the big challenge of IP. Yeah. So fabless is the way forward for this.
Okay, that makes sense.
And Russell, you talked earlier on saying there's not really anyone doing this. So from a competition standpoint, maybe that's not the discussion, but I'm interested to know from a collaboration point of view, there are lots of other tech startups, and some of them starting to scale now, who are going through that same process. Are you talking to them? Are you actually, collaborating with some of them as well?
So the UK's had a history for going back 30 years or so of being probably the leading country in Europe and one of the top 3 countries worldwide for generating new architectures of processors. So we've got a really rich hinterland here of engineers that know how to do interesting new things in processor design. There's a decent number of startups, some at the same stage as us, some a little bit behind, some a little bit ahead in the UK, who are doing interesting things in general purpose as well as AI compute. I think at the moment we're seeing our potential collaborations are coming from the big players, the players that are already out there, people that know the pain of trying to make general purpose compute go faster, players that have been doing it for 20 or 30 years already. So we've got several conversations with companies in that category who are really keen to understand, to validate what we've done, validate the performance, see how that could be combined into their own way of doing things. In terms of the startup community, by and large, we know each other really well. everyone's got their own way of doing things, and not everyone's got a way which allows you to run existing code unchanged. Others are delivering benefits by changing the architecture enough that the code needs to change. So I think for now, everyone's just understanding what everyone does, but working separately. There's not really an obvious collaboration.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. So am I right in saying that you still consider yourself in stealth?
Only because we haven't got a full marketing team, but yes.
Okay, fine. We can have a go. No, okay, move on. So you talked about with VyperLab, you wanting to add in extra functionality, and that's going to keep developing. What do you think are those milestones that you're going to need to hit to be able to start getting out of stealth and to scale?
Building a processor takes a large team of engineers. One of the things I say when I'm talking to investors is, if you look at the universe of hard tech, it's not all about silicon, but silicon is at the more expensive end of what you could be raising in hard tech. And within the universe of silicon, processors are at the expensive end of, there's radio chips and things which cost a lot less than designing what we're doing. Luckily, within the universe of processors, we're at the cheaper end, because if you look at the amount of money that a lot of processor startups have had to raise, many hundreds of millions of dollars typically in the States. And if you look at why, most of them are doing a vast amount of it spending on software. And the difference between us and that is because we're going after general purpose compute, and because we're only looking at running these applications, not the whole stack. We're not porting an operating system, it's just redeploying code. So the headline that comes out of that is our customers have already written the code that they're going to be running on our silicon when we have it. That said, it still takes us 2 or 3 years to get from where we are now to actually having silicon ready to sell. So to your question, finding ways of keeping customers engaged, there'll be a period of time when, from an engineering perspective, we're just heads down and just got a lot of work to do designing the chip. What we can do along the way is, there's various generations coming through with VyperLab. We're on Gen 1 at the moment. There'll be a Gen 2 later this year. There'll probably be a Gen 3 before we actually get as far as silicon. There's a whole modelling environment. We can start to deepen the experience of customers, not just on VyperLab, but actually take a deep dive with their particular piece of code and really help them understand what our silicon will do for them. And there's the collaborations. As I mentioned earlier, we've got a range of quite substantial, well-established businesses that are keen to play. And there'll be numbers coming out from some of those collaborations sooner rather than later, which will again deepen the belief that we can do this.
So just to go on to the funding point that you touched on there, you said right at the beginning when you were telling us the origin story, it was really hard to raise money for a silicon startup in 2019. So I guess the first question is, has that improved by 2025? Are things easier now? Are VCs more receptive?
I think the challenge for any hard tech startup at the moment is the VCs that are looking at the space some of them are coming from a general VC background, and they've come into hard tech, but their funds are probably spread across a bunch of different sectors. And we know that some of the VCs that have been invested in more consumer focused plays, they've had to reallocate their funds to, and so the challenge has been some of the VCs that have come into hard tech are actually not as active now as they were 2 years ago. So it's very up and down essentially, and it's taking a while for a new generation of VCs to come in who are focused just on doing hard tech plays. I don't mean just silicon, I mean hard tech as a wider group. The thing which is moving in the positive direction is we have a sort of a common European view. There's a lot of French, German, Swiss, Swedish VCs, other countries are available, who can come in and happily look at investing in the UK. And this isn't anything to do with recent geopolitics, but if I go back to the 90s and 2000s, actually it was very siloed. UK VCs would invest in UK companies, French VCs in French companies. So we're seeing a much more pan-European approach now.
Yeah, because the assumption would be maybe this capital would be easier to find in the US, but it's interesting that it seems to be more of a European play for you.
I think the challenge for many years has been, at the early stage, US VCs aren't going to cross the Atlantic. There's a few exceptions over time, there always are, but even go back 20 or 30 years, there's always been US VCs looking at the companies on their doorstep, and they've got plenty of companies they can look at. They don't need to come to Europe. It's when you start to go up into the later stage, so Series A, Series B, and then it comes back partly to what I was saying before about the size of investment. There's some chip companies need less, some chip companies will need more. I think it's probably fair to say that at the moment, in terms of, there'll be funds who are active, but maybe they need to raise their next fund to be more active. So there's not a massive number of European VCs right now who are configured to do something as large as a processor startup. And that's probably fair to say. That may well change as the time goes on, as new funds are raised. I think being realistic, any processor company that needs to grow is going to be looking at US capital. We will be at that at a later round for sure.
Okay.
So we love a startup story, don't we, on this podcast? So while we've got you here, we're interested to know any other lessons that you've learned along the way that you can share with others.
Lessons along the way is interesting because I've been around the industry for a long time. So there's lessons from VyperCore, and I think the key lesson I would say here is one of the things I take issue in terms of how startups are described at the moment is we have a big obsession with founders. Okay, I'm a co-founder of VyperCore, but actually we're a team of 12 engineers and 3 non-engineers. And this isn't a developer activity. This is an engineering project. And the way you deliver success with an engineering project is to have some really, really good engineers. And I'm really proud to say how good and exciting our engineering team is. And when I talk to other processor companies about how far we've got, creating our first 64-bit RISC-V processor in, I think it was 15 months. And the question that comes back to me is, which design did we start with? And I say, no, clean sheet, absolutely nothing to start with. And then normally their jaws will drop open at that point. And that's a testament to how strong our team is. If you're going to try and go into an established industry, breaking the mold, up against this world-class entrenched players, you need to have the best team available. So you don't want to compromise on the quality of people you're looking for. So that's my number one lesson from VyperCore.
I think David Cleaveley, who we've had on the podcast, would love that as an answer, because he had this whole conversation about you need to be engineering-led first and foremost. So, yeah, that's a great piece of advice. Thank you.
The flip side of that is, we have a big engineering project to do, but we have to deliver something externally, either commercial traction or some form of other validation, in order for investors to want to come in. So you can have a very long-term deep dive engineering project, and that may be the only way you're ever going to build a product. But you've got to layer it on with external validation from the market, because ultimately investors want to see some proof, understandably, that people are going to buy this product when you built it. So it's combining those two, which is the challenge.
I'm glad you talked about talent, because it's the perfect segue into my next question, which is around, being a Cambridge-based deep tech, hard tech company. Were you always going to be in Cambridge? Do you think the area's got the talent pool you're going to need, to scale? Or do you see yourselves as a hybrid company and you'll just hire talent wherever it might be? What's your kind of approach to that?
So we actually have 2 offices today. We have an office in Cambridge. We also have an office in Bristol. And we've chosen those 2 locations because those are arguably the 2 strongest cities, not just in the UK, but in Europe, for processor design talent. And I don't just mean the silicon, I mean the software that goes with it as well. And when I say in Europe, I said this to a French VC the other day, and even they agreed with me. So, there's places like Grenoble they could have been arguing for. So it's a well-recognised centre of 2 centres of talent. So at the moment, our hiring policy has been we want to have people in office. Again, this comes back to the engineering culture. There is no substitute for swivelling around in your chair and asking a question in the moment of the guy that's sitting next to you. So we have a hybrid model, as we don't ask people to be in the office 5 days a week. Some people choose to, but we have core hours and core days. And that's a model we will try and sustain for as long as we can. We consciously look to have 2 sites, but 1 team. So we don't have one function in one office and another function in another office. At the moment, we've hired the talent where we've come across it, whether it's in Cambridge or Bristol. We haven't looked at overseas hires. We haven't looked at people coming from other cities unless they're willing to move. And that's the model we're going to take forward. Is there enough talent in Cambridge and Bristol? Probably. We'll find out. There's a lot of interesting people around. There's also a lot of interesting companies around. So quite whether it's a bit of a game of musical chairs, where there's enough chairs for enough people to sit on, or vice versa, is no matter. But we can tap into other initiatives. So Bristol and Cambridge universities have both got strong design activities inside the universities and research activities to bring new talent forward. There's other universities. When we look at CVs, we see the same universities crop up again and again in terms of people that are producing the sort of graduates with the sort of skills that we would look for. And we can help to bring more of those in as well. So there's talent.
Well, this is a good opportunity maybe to ask you a little bit more about Bristol. So on the podcast, we've spoken about Manchester, we've spoken about Leeds. How do you find the Bristol ecosystem compared to the Cambridge ecosystem in terms of either entrepreneurship support at the university or the general kind of pool of talent in Bristol? Are they comparable? What kind of support have you had as a business from both the Cambridge and Bristol ecosystems?
So we're not really plugged in either city, plugged into either the university spin-out, because we're very much a start-up rather than a spin-out. been out for anything. So I can't speak to Bristol or indeed Cambridge University. There's definitely a lot more networking opportunity in Cambridge than in Bristol. Bristol's got a sort of different mix. It doesn't have the biotech. There's some biotech and some medtech, but nowhere near as strong as Cambridge. There's a lot of software startups, a lot of impact type startups as well. So I think a lot of the networking there is informal, more through friendship networks as well. I don't mean to demean it. I mean, there's quite strong networks that exist off the back of that. One of the things we've done with VyperCore is we've put together some open source networking opportunities, so open source silicon and open source software. Say we at VyperCore. One or two of our guys at VyperCore have done it. It's a personal initiative and we've been sponsoring it. So we're trying to encourage more networking within the chip and processor communities in Bristol. There's probably nothing directly focused on chip and processors in Cambridge. There's a lot more technology, like this 21 to watch opportunities in Cambridge. So there's different sorts of networking. They could both up their game. It'd be great from our perspective if there was more in Cambridge linked to the genuine, quite large pool of talent, which is these days sitting inside quite a lot of large companies. So people are less interested to get out and network. Bristol's got more of a larger number of startups in the space, but it's informal networking, nothing technology-wide, so they could both do better.
And I think we've seen a lot. A few weeks ago, we mentioned 0 Point Motion, who are a Bristol-based startup. We're starting to see a lot more traction as well from Bristol, which is great. And there's another episode coming up as well, which is on the communities and, how all of these different communities start forming. So maybe there's someone will be listening and think that we need to start one for you as well.
Well, the interesting thing with Bristol and Cambridge is that in our area, in processors, there's been this sort of, I don't like using the word symbiosis, because it's like a consultancy word, but I think it is a genuine symbiosis between the startup and the industry and the university academic. So if you look at what happened in Cambridge, the history of the Cambridge cluster is well known, didn't directly come out of the university. If you look at the Silicon grouping, ARM came out of Acorn, which was a startup, nothing to the university at all, happened to hire a bunch of Cambridge grads, but that's kind of immaterial. ARM is now busy sponsoring a bunch of research work inside the university. It's got access to the cream of the talent that comes from university, but it's also putting in people from around the country and around the world coming into Cambridge. So you have this feedback loop between companies like ARM and the university. And we've had the same in Bristol. Bristol's cluster also goes back to the 1980s and also didn't start with the university. It started with a company called Inmos. And when Inmos sort of grew but then collapsed, some of those went into university and started researching there, which then there's a whole bunch of companies around Bristol that can put their roots back to that research group in Bristol, but that research group in Bristol having started off originally in industry. So both cities have got this really interesting feedback loop between academics and startups and established companies. There's probably a whole business school project in that somewhere.
I think there has been. I think we might even have had a few people on the podcast talking about that in the past too. Russell, it's been great catching up with you today and finding out a little bit more. As we do with many of our startup guests, is there anything that you want to ask of the audience? Is there anything that you need an extra bit of help on at the moment?
Well, we're going to be recruiting later this year, that's for sure. And we want to be recruiting, we mentioned in Bristol, but very much in Cambridge as well. So if anyone's interested to find out more, then follow us on LinkedIn, come and look at our webpage. Our webpage, as you say, it looks a little bit stealthy at the moment, but there will be more in due course. But we're also keen to do what we can in Cambridge, as we've been doing in Bristol, to try and get some more networking in this area, not for hiring purposes, just for genuine cross-fertilisation and actually build up the idea that Cambridge is strong in silicon. We still call it Silicon Fen. There's not as much as there used to be. I'd love to try and do to play our part in building that up again.
Brilliant. Thanks, Russell.
Today's show was produced by Carl Homer of Cambridge TV and supported by our media partner, Business Weekly. The Cambridge Tech Podcast is available on all major podcast platforms and on cambridgetechpodcast.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. It'll really help others discover the show.